The new FNaF interactive novel has just been released, or in my case, was leaked weeks ago, and I'm making a video on it early so I can release it at the same time as the book. And now we have 4 different versions of the Into the Pit story. But I gotta say, this new book is somehow the most similar to the original short story and the most different out of all the other retellings. There's no way to sugarcoat it. This is the most batshit insane FNAF book I have ever read. It blows any other weird fright stories out of the water. A lot of decisions and routes would lead to weird, nonsensical, and even hilarious outcomes. I mean, Oswald gets hit by a car in 5 different game overs. In one ending, Oswald gets shot, and another ending has us prevent the missing children's incident from even happening. This book has so much weird stuff that makes me just love it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This book, while crazy, offers a lot of new and interesting lore for us to chew on, and I'm going to treat this book like it's in the game's timeline. I'm going to split this video into 3 sections, based on the 3 main routes you can take in Return to the Pit. Overall, the canon route is basically one-to-one with the original short story. Even the ending is literally just the short story's ending copy and pasted with some minor additions. Which is odd because this book is said to be a retelling of the game version of Into the Pit. Maybe it was just a marketing strategy. But anyway, I'm not gonna recap the original short story here, since the video will be way too long, but I do have a summary video about Into the Pit if you want a recap of the story. But anyways, at the start of the story, after Oswald visits Jeff's for the first time, there are 2 different dream sequences Oswald has. Each dream occurs depending on the choices you make. The first dream sequence that happens is a result of Oswald sitting in the living room and watching a rom-com with his family. The dream has Oswald in a beach, then the sky suddenly turns dark and thunder erupts. The tide then drags Oswald deeper into the ocean, with no hope of being able to go back to shore again. Then he realizes the ocean is actually a giant ball pit, like the one from Jeff's. Then Oswald looks down on himself, like he's being recorded on a drone, and sees himself as tiny, surrounded by thousands of colorful balls. The drone gets further until Oswald was indistinguishable from the balls. His head is just another round object, and he drowns in a colorful sea of plastic. Oswald wakes up in a sweat. He knew it was a dream, but to him, it felt like an omen or a warning not to go back to Jeff's. And that's what happens, and it's a game over. An alternate dream sequence occurs when Oswald decides not to watch the rom-com and go to his room and sleep for the night. The dream has Oswald swimming at the beach again, but this time, the animal characters that Oswald regularly draws tries to drown him. This dream sequence, I feel, showcases the fact that Oswald has these vague memories or visions of going into the ball pit and knowing about the Fazbear band. Before the book came out, I had this theory that Oswald was able to draw the Fazbear band without even knowing what they are, because there was a version of him that existed in 1985, and somehow in the present he can remember what happened at Freddy's because of his past self, or something like that. And I think this book gives credence to this theory, and you'll see why in a sec. This version of the ball pit is very deep. Like sometimes there are game overs where Oswald would just get stuck in the pit itself because it's too deep. Jeff's Pizza itself is kinda different as well. When Oswald goes back to the past, he finds out that Freddy's was split up into 2 different stores when Jeff bought the place, and that's why Jeff's was smaller compared to Freddy's. And what used to be the arcade was a boarded up shop next to Jeff's. If we decide to follow the yellow thing when we visit Freddy's for the first time, it gives Oswald a party hat. When Oswald wears it, he starts to feel dizzy and the room starts to spin around him. Then this feeling suddenly stops. But Oswald felt floaty, like he's in a dream, but different. The book describes it as Oswald living in someone else's dream. He is barely in control of his own body as he follows the yellow thing down a dark hall. At the end of the hall was another door. The yellow thing opens it and Oswald forcefully steps inside the room. The room itself looked like a large storage closet. There were old toys on shelves, a mop, and a bucket in the corner, and a kid sitting on the ground, also wearing a party hat. Oswald realizes that the kid was dead. Then Oswald turns around and the yellow thing kills Oswald. Game over. Now, from what we gathered, it seems pretty obvious that Oswald was seeing through the memories of one of the missing kids, being lured into the safe room and being killed. Since there is a child already dead inside, I would guess the dead kid to be Susie, since she was the first, and I would guess Oswald experiences Jeremy's memories, since the party hat that the yellow thing gives us is colored blue, with blobs of green sparkles. Now what's interesting is that this is actually different from the other Into the Pit stories, where they say that the kids are supposed to be dead in a party room. But now it's the safe room. And this isn't the first time something in this book blatantly changes something from the other adaptations. Next point, when we see all the dead kids in the safe room in the canon route, we have an option to escape the building through a back door. When we do, Oswald is in an alley. Then he hears what seems to be a little girl calling for help. If we decide to help the girl, Oswald is led up the alley to an old wooden door that leads down a cellar. When Oswald opens it, he hears the girl inside. When he goes downstairs, he sees that the voice is coming from a toy doll that resembles a little girl. The doll had pigtails, is wearing a red dress, her whole body was bone white, and she had a red nose. Oswald freaks out and tries to escape, but then the yellow thing arrives and kills him, while the girl doll watches. Game over. This is obviously Eleanor making a return, since in To Be Beautiful she is also described as a doll, and her voice is also described as a young girl's voice. Of course, this description fits more with the drawing of Eleanor than the actual description from the original short story, but it is her nonetheless, and since we see her and the yellow thing in the same room, this debunks theories that these two are one of the same. But other than that, I wonder why Eleanor is in a cellar under the pizzeria. And is this actually accurate? Was Eleanor actually present under the pizzeria in 1985? It seems very much so. This is possibly where the clown robot came from. But more interestingly, if Oswald doesn't help Eleanor and goes onto the main street, he stands in place as he sees the road and buildings around him fast forward to the present day. And Oswald sees Jeffs in front of him, but he also sees something horrifying. The town didn't just fast forward, Oswald did as well. He was now in his mid-40s. Now this is interesting, but I will hold off on the explanation later. For now, since Oswald is described as being in his 40s, and he was 10 before the time skip, this heavily implies that every Into the Pit adaptation takes place between 2015 to 2024. And since we have that calendar in the Into the Pit game, the only date that matches with it is 2018. So Into the Pit most likely takes place in 2018. One of the strange things that happens in the book is when Oswald's dad is taken into the ball pit, and Oswald has to eat breakfast with the yellow thing the next day. We have the option to basically crash out and run out of the house. Oswald goes to the neighbor's house for help, but the door opens to reveal Chica, and both her and the yellow thing eat Oswald. Game over. Now this is strange because we never see Chica escape to the present, and I doubt the neighbors are into cosplay. My only explanation is that maybe Oswald was hallucinating and saw his neighbor as Chica, like how he hallucinates seeing the robots in the Into the Pit game. Now this is a biggie. Remember on how all of the versions of Into the Pit had 6 dead kids lined up against the wall? Well, now in this book, it's 5 kids. And it's not a mistake, I can assure you that. But out of all the weird shit that happens in this book, that I will explain in a sec, this is somehow the most odd out of all. I mean, first, they changed the party room to the safe room, which is fine, it makes it more accurate to the games and it doesn't really make a difference. But having 5 kids instead of 6 is so bizarre. Andrew just disappeared from this book entirely, just a few months after the game released, which had a focus on the number 6. 6 party hats, 6 balloons, 6 dead kids, 6 dad items, and etc. Andrew's just gone, and I don't know why. And before you say it, no, it does not mean Andrew became non-canon. This is literally another Frights book, and Frights can't happen without Andrew. and we still have that Fetch game being made, and Fetch is possessed by Andrew. So now that leaves me with one option. Andrew didn't die with the rest of the missing kids, but maybe he died close to that event. I just hope that Fetch game gives us more on Andrew's backstory, because I think we sorely need it at this point. And that's the canon route. Instead of going to the neighbors, we have the option to go to Jeff's to help Oswald's dad. And on our way, we see a car stop next to us. Oswald sees a man in his 40s, telling him to get in. He looks at Oswald unblinkingly. If we decide to get in the car, the man is bewildered, saying that he'd heard stories but he now has evidence. Before Oswald gets out, the man reveals himself to be Chip, one of the boys Oswald hung out with in 1985. Oswald explains that he used the ball pit all summer to travel back to 1985. Chip doesn't know much about the ball pit, but he explains that some weird stuff has happened in the summer of 1985. There was some strange time jumping. Chip never experienced it himself. He describes that summer of 1985 as crazy, until it turned into an awful summer. Chip says that the other kids from his time went back in time, but he didn't know if it was the ball pit or something else, until now. When Oswald tells Chip what happened to his dad and about the yellow rabbit, Chip nods along to everything, like he's heard all of this before. Chip knows about the rabbit and what it has done. This isn't the first time it time jumped, and no one was able to destroy it, until now. He tells Oswald that he put together a team to stop the yellow thing once and for all, and since it has appeared again, they have a chance to kill it. Chip asks Oswald if they want to join them, and if you do, you start the journey. Now you know why people call this the Pit Avengers. Now to analyze. Chip says that a lot of kids in his time have time jumped. To where, I have no idea. But more importantly, Oswald wasn't the first victim of the yellow thing, which was sorta implied in the game, where the yellow thing had this voice line. Which could mean that the other victims have turned into the monster versions of the Fazbear band. This route is basically just a total disaster. When Oswald arrives to the base, he sees a half a dozen people gathered up and waiting for the leader. Gabriella is also there, and it is revealed that she is Chip's daughter. When the leader arrives, Oswald is freaked out because the leader was the yellow rabbit. People didn't seem to see it except him. If he tries to warn the team, he dies. If he tries to take it down with Gabriella, they die. But if we play along for now, the team head to Jeff's to kill the yellow thing, not knowing it was their leader. Oswald gets the chance to try and save his dad, and when he finds him, he sees that the yellow thing ripped off Chip's head from his body, and a shootout occurs, resulting into one of the bullets hitting Oswald in the stomach, and he dies in the pit. Yeah, no, whatever we try to do, we fail or die. That's it. But what's funny is that the leader was the yellow thing, and the yellow thing replaced Oswald's dad, which means Oswald's dad is the leader of the Pit Avengers. So in all that time, he had this hidden second life that none of us knew about. And this is the most funniest shit ever. No one can convince me this is a bad story. So in the regular canon ending, Oswald finds a half of a special gold coin. And if we were able to find the other half earlier in the book, we combine it into one. Then the book tells us that we can go back and use that coin. Basically, when Oswald visits Freddy's for the first time, he sees an arcade no one is playing. The arcade was called 8-Bit Escape. On screen it had a pixelated smiling yellow rabbit face. And at the coin slot there is a sign that reads Special Gold Tokens Only. Now if we have the golden coin and start the game, Oswald is sucked into the game. Oswald finds himself in a pixelated version of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, but the ball pit was gone and replaced with a table set up as if it's ready for a birthday party. It also had cake at the far end of it, and plates and cups placed at individual spots. But no one was sitting at the table, and the whole place was empty. Oswald searches the location to find a quit button, and he finds himself at the safe room, where he sees 4 kids wearing party hats tied to a chair. Oswald unties the kids, but they don't move. Then he hears footsteps coming to the room, and hides. He then sees the yellow thing carrying a 5th kid, a boy, into the room. The boy tries to escape, but the yellow thing puts a party hat on the kid and he stops squirming. Then the thing ties the kid to the chair and leaves. Oswald figures out what he needs to do. He rips the party hats from their heads and they snap out of their trance. They follow Oswald into a vent as he tries to reach the main exit. The vent then collapses into the dining area. Oswald stands and then notices that one of the kids sat on the table with the cake. Oswald tries to get the kid to move, but then all 5 sit on the table and demand cake. Oswald sees that the yellow thing is slowly approaching them, so he has to decide quick. If we decide to give the kids the cake, we quickly give all of them cake, with the last one being a curly-haired girl. When it's done, the yellow rabbit stops, convulses, and then explodes. Text flashes in front of Oswald telling him that he's won. Then he is sucked back into the real world and into his own time. He sees that Jeff's looks better than before, and Oswald realizes that the ball pit was gone. And on a wall beside him stood a news article reading, "Kids saved from certain death. Whole town rejoices." There's a picture of a person in a mascot suit being handcuffed by the police, and 5 kids watching with their parents. There is a date too, 1985. And that is the good ending. We prevent the missing children's incident from ever happening. Which I'm not the biggest fan of. I would rather we aren't able to save them, but here we are. Now there's a lot to unpack. First is that we now have confirmation for who the last kid in the MCI was. Or at least it's more narrowed down. If we assume that Jeremy was the 2nd, then the 5th is either Fritz or Gabriel. And obviously, the reason I call it the Happiest Day route is because this is basically Happiest Day. Which does make me think that this place in the minigame is in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. This route also confirms that Cassidy is the Happiest Day receiver, since the last cake that Oswald gives is to a girl with curly hair, who we see in a drawing in the book itself, which looks like the logbook Cassidy. So yeah, Cassidy is most likely to be this kid, which was obvious, but I digress. Second, when the yellow thing dies, the ball pit ceases to exist. And this is not the only ending that this happens. If we follow the yellow thing the 2nd time we visit the pizzeria, which is not part of the canon route, the yellow thing turns around and tries to kill Oswald. If the reader has the flashlight, we flash the thing, and for some reason it falls on its back and starts convulsing aggressively, like it was experiencing a spring lock failure. Then blood is seen pouring from underneath. The thing was dead, and when Oswald tries to get back into his own time, the ball pit is not present. Instead, it's the table with the 5 kids eating cake. So you might be asking yourself, if the ball pit disappears when we kill the yellow thing, why is it still present at the end of the canon route? The only explanation I have is, it seems that the ball pit will always exist when all 5 kids die. So if we kill the yellow thing early and he doesn't kill all 5, the ball pit disappears. But if the yellow thing dies in the present, where the 5 kids are already dead, then nothing changes. What this implies, I'm not quite sure yet, but there is one last thing to talk about. Let's talk about the ball pit. Now listen, you might easily assume that the ball pit is literal time travel, but that is not the case. Because first, the yellow thing didn't actually kill the kids, and that is confirmed by the fact that Afton was arrested after the Happiest Day route. There's also a scene where Oswald wishes he had more tokens for arcade games. Then arcade tokens suddenly spawn in his pocket, just like in the original short story. But of course, from what we see, the ball pit can change the past, and people from the past can remember Oswald in the future. And Oswald can remember things from the version of himself that went to the 1985 Freddy's. The ball pit changes the future is actually not something new. In the Stitch Wraith epilogues, when Larson is trapped in Eleanor's memories and has to go into the ball pit, we get to see the many victims of Eleanor, one of which was a character named Sam who was wearing a Blackbird costume. As the kid was walking to his school, Larson then sees that Eleanor spun the kid so fast he was disoriented and was almost gonna be hit by a train, until Larson pushes him off at the last second in a ditch. Now what's interesting is that in the Blackboard story itself, Sam says that he fell in a ditch, which means Larson changed the past and saved Sam. The second time we see the ball pit affect time is in the game, where small things in the present change when you change it in the past, like the paper pals, the doors, and the guitar. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is, the ball pit can change the past, but its version of the past is not the real world. It's probably an alternate reality that can affect the real world, like how in FNaF world when something bad happens in the flip side, aka the real world, the FNaF world changes and becomes corrupted. So that's what I think the ball pit is, and what it can do. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, subscribe, all that jazz, and I'll see you on the flip side.